On this episode of Real Wins, we rip the bandaid off a controversial opinion about leasing, that the entry-level property management role makes no sense. If you find this or our other episodes helpful, please like and subscribe on YouTube or your preferred podcast listening app. Let's jump into the conversation. All right, Mike, here we are, back for another Real Wins episode. It's great to see you again. We were down and out there for a couple of weeks, but I feel like we're on a good cadence now. So thanks for popping on.
Yeah, I'm excited for another chat here. These conversations are always good, and I think you mentioned this one time before, but these things always fly by too. We were like, next thing you know, we're just chatting. We're like, oh, we'll talk for 10 minutes, and next thing you know, it's 20, and we're like, oh wow, a lot of stuff to talk about. Either that or we're just windbags. I don't know which it is. So
yeah, maybe a little bit of both sometimes. But no, let's jump right into this one. Let's rip the Band-Aid off and hook the listener, because we're going to talk about the obvious multifamily mistake today, and that is the entry-level property management position. So boom, we've captured everyone's attention. We actually had a debate on this similar topic in a couple of months ago. But you know, you and I and another couple colleagues were able to check out a handful actually of properties in Colorado in recent weeks. And unfortunately, what we saw at every single property and what we've seen at many properties across the country is that you have this very entry-level green new person who's been in the role for, in the case of some of our tours, 2 months, 3 months, and they are actually in this very big role needing to sell the vision of the property and get leases signed and to drive revenue for the owners. So let's start there, Mike. I know you have a ton of thoughts about this. You very much don't agree with the entry-level property management position. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, well, look, the fact that what is the entry level property manager position is oftentimes leasing associate, right? And so you have a leasing associate who is brand new to the industry almost every time on site, doing what is effectively one of the most important jobs to drive revenue, to drive occupancy. And you've got them in there with a week or two of training, and it's their entry level job, and they're the lowest paid in the property management firm or at the property. That makes no sense. What other industry in America puts their primary revenue drivers as the lowest paid entry level position in any business? And it's absolutely insane why that continues to be done in this industry. And it's a massive disconnect. And oftentimes these people who are attracted to the entry level property management job and are stuck into a leasing position, and all they want to do is become a property manager. They don't want to be a salesperson. And this role, for it to work right, a leasing person needs to be a salesperson, a good salesperson who understands customer experience, who understands how to sell, how to convey the value of the property, the asset in its proper light, and the positioning and the brand messaging, and how to follow up effectively, how to call, how to talk to, and how to close prospective residents in an effective way. And there's such a gap, and it's crazy to me.
Yeah, and that's something that we talk a lot about we talk a lot about it amongst ourselves. We talk a lot about it with customers that set up meetings with us, and it really is an elephant in the room in the industry, because you think about all the other industries across this world that we live in, and you just don't really see that anywhere else. You're not making you're not buying a home or buying a car or whatever it is, making these big financial decisions with someone who just learned what they were doing 2 weeks ago after 2 or 3 days of training. It's pretty remarkable. And you make a great point that most of those individuals don't want to be in sales. They get into property management, quote unquote, so they can become a property manager. And one of the things I think you speak really well to is this idea that sales is sales and management is management. And the two personalities there are very different personalities. Maybe you could kind of tease that apart a little bit and kind of give some of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious when you're hiring for a salesperson position in any other type of company. You're looking for a certain, not just a type of experience, but a certain type of personality type, or someone who's excited about getting into a sales career and a sales position, not in like a service position, back of the office, budgeting, even resident experience position, but someone who actually really wants to be and is motivated by helping people make decisions. And it's two wildly different people types oftentimes that want to go into both career trajectories. And that's why, what we've done at Charlesgate is carve up the functions of property management into multiple roles, leasing track being one, and then actual sort of resident services track being another, and property management really kind of separated. So you can have professionals who are attracted to the different roles and operate extremely well in either case. And then for the leasing side, we've got people who are professional, well-trained, well-compensated salespeople who know that their job is solely and singularly to get people attracted to the property, help them make the right decision, give them a great experience, and convert more tours into leases while delivering an amazing experience for residents, attracting and closing the right people who are more likely to renew later on as well. And so this is just a key difference to know, like when you actually have that objective and that sole objective as a leasing professional, it just makes so much difference to the outcomes of whether it's a lease up in the first place or even ongoing, post-stabilized leasing as well.
I think what becomes really, quite fascinating and almost obvious about this conversation, the more you think about it, is how important that role is, obviously within the organization, but how important that role is as it pertains to interfacing with marketing. We talk a lot about this connection between marketing and sales, or marketing and leasing. And I still think that's, maybe a little bit of a clunky phrase that the industry doesn't necessarily grasp. But at the end of the day, you need your marketing team, you need your marketing partner to be able to communicate with the sales function of the property, which is a business of the business, so that the two can understand one another. And one of the things that, is often a stereotypical trait of the entry-level PM is their hair's on fire. They're pulling it out every day. They got to do a million things. They're juggling, tours here, tours there. They got a fire here, a fire there. And really the last thing that they have time for is to really think about sales from a strategic standpoint. And then, not to mention go sit down and have an hour-long conversation with the marketing partner to discuss strategy around how to improve performance at the property. Again, the more you sort of break down these walls and think about it and deconstruct this problem, it is super obvious that this just doesn't make sense at a property.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I think that's what you illustrated is spot on for what I usually like to say is jack of all trades, hair on fire property management. And so that's exactly what happens when you have, even you might have one manager on site that's also doing leasing. In a bigger building, you might have three, a community manager, assistant manager, and then your junior varsity entry level who's doing leasing. And it just, nobody has time because they're all trying to do everything all at once, and they're all doing each of those things. Even the best managers are doing each of those things sort of marginally well. But if you put them in a position to be accountable to specific outcomes and in roles that are curated around functions, it makes for much better results overall. And one of those things is having leasing that can then be directly connected to marketing team. Whether you have an outsourced agency or in-house marketing, you can connect that. Say part of the leasing role is, guess what? We want feedback on how your tours went, who's touring, how they went. Give feedback back to marketing so that they can then adjust, amplify the marketing that's working and cut out the marketing that's not. And there's just such a huge gap in that. And it makes no sense because ultimately the best information you're going to get of how well your marketing is working is from the people you're marketing to, from the residents coming in for tours and understanding who's likely to rent, who is, high likelihood to rent and how that's going, what the feedback is, what they resonated with on the marketing. And just have that information to feedback, to create the feedback loop into marketing is so powerful. And so that's why it's just such a massive gap on not having that opportunity and tying together marketing and leasing. And the fact that could be a whole nother sort of episode in itself, frankly, Chris, is like, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever why that isn't done on a regular basis, no matter who's handling leasing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Transforming Cities, brought to you by Authentic, delivering premier multifamily brand experiences and smart digital marketing. Authentic's proven approach accelerates leasing velocity, boosts rental rates, and increases long-term value. You can find out more at AuthenticFF.com. And by Charlesgate, the multifamily investor's secret weapon to help underwrite, go to market, and operate projects that generate market-beating returns. With an adaptive staffing model and on-demand leasing teams, Charlesgate empowers a better resident experience at an efficient cost structure for today's owners. Visit charlesgate.com for more. That's right. And I guess just taking one more drive at this marketing angle, when we went into these properties, we did these tours, we would ask, hey, what are you hearing from renter prospects? What are they saying when they come in the door? What are they looking for? What other properties are they visiting? What are the big themes that come up? And we got a few answers, but I think on the whole, the I'm assuming the sort of reality there is that question wasn't really asked, or that wasn't probed the folks coming in for tours. And all that to say is that is maybe the most important thing that you need to be asking all the prospects that come in the door. What are you looking for? What attracted you here? How did you find us? What are you weighing us against? What other options are you looking into? And that's, again, you can train that the best that you can. But if someone is 2 months out of college, this is their first job, and now they're in charge of 10 other things and selling the kind of the vision of the property and closing deals, it just doesn't make sense. It's too much. It's overwhelming, and you're never going to get that marketing to sales cohesion that you're really looking for. And that, frankly, is, I think, a requirement of running a well-oiled business, which at the end of the day, a property is as a business.
Totally. And that reminds me of a LinkedIn post I saw from Lisa Trojan the other day, who is a marketing and kind of leasing trainer, a well-known one in the multifamily industry. So kudos to her for the post. But she mentioned how minimal training, or how there is a lack of investment in training for leasing. And I totally agree with that. And part of the reason for that is because you've got property managers trying to do 15 different functions. So even when there is an investment in training, it's just there's no ability to really put it into practice, taking regular reps and like actually practicing doing things, whether it's role playing or practice touring or walkthroughs, or really think about, what is the resident journey and tour path through a property? How can we make this better and more seamless and a better experience and more likely to convert? Because you just don't have time. Never mind the lack of experience from an entry-level position, but you just don't have time to do all that stuff when you're trying to do all these things at once as an on-site manager, when you can't just focus on the leasing effort itself and the leasing and marketing specifically of that connection.
Yeah, I think we would be remiss if we didn't also talk about burnout in this conversation, because a lot of the entry-level property managers that we talked to, again, they had only been there for 3 months or 6 months, and it was maybe a first or second job. But that means that there was someone before them that got burned out and left, and that there was someone before them that got burned out and left or went to a different role. And I think what you see with that constant turnover is that, again, it just doesn't work, and it's an elephant in the room. And I know, Mike, your team at Charlesgate, you kind of started out in property management, kind of doing the old model like this, and you learned rather quickly that that's not the way to do it. It's not going to work. And you quickly re-architected everything into the pod model. And I know we have an episode about that, but maybe you could just touch on that as it relates to this challenge of, or maybe this elephant in the room of this entry level.
Yeah, I think exactly. So that's it's in the reason why we've sort of deployed this idea of a pod model, which is concepted around an idea of which is a multiple functional specialization. But we realized very early on and quickly that there's just too many functions for any one role to handle, and there's often not enough delineation on who's doing what. So even if you have enough bandwidth on site, that idea of there's a property manager, a community manager, there's an assistant property manager, there's a leasing consultant type of thing on site, which we see oftentimes. There's just not enough delineation on who owns what, who is responsible for what part of the functions required to deliver, great property outcomes and great resident experience. So what we chose to do instead is say, hey, okay, let's put, someone who's strategically in charge of this pod or portfolio, this property or portfolio, as the leader of the pod that can, think about a little bit more strategy in terms of what's our place in the market? How are we budgeting? How are we controlling costs? How are we strategically business planning? How are we trying to develop the resident experience? But then there are other folks on the team, like a resident services manager as part of a pod, who is specifically oriented and goals are set around their job is to deliver a great resident experience at the property. So they don't have to worry about budgeting, and they don't have to worry about rent collections per se. They can worry about delivering a great resident experience. And then same thing with leasing, right? And so leasing is then that other carve-out that we're focused on today, where it's okay, now I can have a professionalized leasing team who is centralized. By the way, we're also centralizing that. So we're not putting one leasing person on a single property, because that's not economically efficient. And so we're centralizing leasing such that our professional leasing team can lease across a portfolio of properties and really just get so many reps in, really understand, hone the craft, and learn how to best deliver that initial impression experience, and showcase people how to make the best decision to elect to live in a property in a way that's way more powerful. And that's, that obviously carries down in a few other functions as well that I did not get into. But it just seems extremely obvious to me and to us and how we operate that is the way that things should be done. And it makes especially all the difference in the world when you take such a lens onto the revenue side of the P&L for properties and say, what do we need to do to make sure we're really driving revenue? And leasing and marketing being a core of tying that together to make sure you're leasing faster, occupancy remains high, and you're delivering a great resident experience as first impression in a committed way, so that we are delivering better financial outcomes, but better experience for residents and new residents.
That makes me think about this idea of a career trajectory for the property manager. And I think one of the reasons why we see the burnout and the turnover in that role is because they get into it not necessarily knowing where they're going to end up. And you said it earlier in the conversation that typically they want to kind of become a higher level property manager. And so there's the idea of being a salesperson isn't necessarily something that they wanted to do in the first place. But what I like about the approach that you just mentioned is that there are sort of these defined roles and career paths in front of people so that they understand, okay, if I start here, then I can end up there, and then I can move up to there. And it's not sort of this muddy, sort of like a, sort of cyclical move from property to property, where maybe you're an entry level here, then become a manager there or assistant manager there. And it kind of just, what are you doing over time, and what's the goal here? And I think that's also something that we should point to that is definitely broken in the traditional model of property management roles, because there is no career trajectory. Like, where do you go from here? I think is a big question that a lot of those employees have.
Yeah, that's a big reason why there's so much turnover in the industry. It's one of the highest turnover industries in the country. And it's an extremely hard job, especially when you're asked to do 15 different things and not quite sure what's most important at any given time. And you're just getting turning into like a response mode or reactive mode, instead of being able to have a team that is more proactive and can really be aligned around how best can we deliver the results that need to achieve the goals of this property ownership group or whatever it might be, to really drive those outcomes. So that's the critical piece. And then once you do that, once you unlock that, you can really drive in even more into the details about how you can make each of those functions even operate better. So in the leasing example, for instance, we're conducting on-demand leasing tours. We're not like staffing an office from 10 to 4 on weekdays and maybe 10 to 3 on Sundays or Saturdays and hoping someone can see it at that time. All right, we have a professional leasing team who is operating on demand. They're getting compensated as sales professionals, so they're much more responsive to residents and much more flexible in terms of how we schedule tours and sort of meet residents where they are. They can typically be more likely to meet and tour a property after sort of typical work hours. So a lot of our tours end up on a more flexible schedule then. So instead of having them waste time, twiddle their fingers, 9 to 5 or 10 to 4 in a leasing office, sitting in a building doing nothing, we're empowering them to lease across multiple properties and do that, like I said, on an on-demand scheduled basis with prospective residents. It's just such a better way to do it. It's better resident experience, and it leads to better results for the property.
Before we wrap up, Mike, I mean, it's, I kind of laugh at this a little bit because I think it is both obvious, and yet it's so ingrained into the industry. I have to imagine that someone's listening to this and they have this problem, or maybe they're an entry level PM themselves, and they're not quite sure what the next step is for them. So like, let's just say there's someone listening and they have their properties organized this way, and they're like nodding their head. They're saying, this doesn't really make sense. I want to kind of learn more about this. What's the first step or 2 steps they could take to just learn more about how to rethink and reposition their whole ecosystem around something that makes a little bit more sense?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously I'm happy to talk to any folks and jazz around some ideas with them on different things. But I think fundamentally the challenge here is it's hard. It's hard to make this shift, especially if you have maybe a large portfolio or an old school kind of property manager who's sort of used to doing things one way. And, oftentimes it's moving. There's a lot of moving parts to shift. There's like, it's a complete, what's being tossed around the industry now is this idea of centralization, right? And it's like, okay, oftentimes you see we're centralizing and we're going to move the assistant property manager back to the corporate office and we're centralized and being more efficient. Really, that's bullshit, right? Well, that doesn't do anything. What we're doing here and talking about is a complete reimagining of the organizational structure of property management operations. And some of that is centralized. Some of it is better delivered closer to the resident, like the resident services roles. And so it is not an easy, like from A to B type of process to transition this across a portfolio or across a building. And, there's a lot of thoughtfulness and kind of planning that we had to put in to implement the system like this, especially across various size buildings and portfolios. Because and one other thing to say is it's a nimble and flexible system, because so we can serve mid-market properties and we can serve large scale large properties as well with it. But it's not a one size fits all either. So really, it's a great question. Like, where do you start to do this? It's a great question, but it's a very hard question to say step 1, 2, and 3. It's just more to it than that. And so, I've definitely loved having some of the conversation I had with other folks around the country who are sort of thinking about and leaning how to move in this direction, or are moving in this direction, which is exciting to see.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to have more of those conversations. I guess I'd leave it at that, or maybe we can set up another Real Wins episode where we're like, what are the steps to move in this direction? Because it's going to take a lot more than our 2 minutes left in this conversation.
That's right. We can definitely do that. And so for anyone that wants to send hate mail about disagreeing with you about entry level PM, what's the address for that? What's the address for that again? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Chris at transformingcities.io. I think.
Yeah. Mike DeMella at transformingcities.io, something like that. Another fun episode. It's always fun to riff like this and maybe take a stance that isn't the popular stance. But, in this case, I think it's a stance that a lot of people that are actually doing this and kind of going through the reps understands. Thanks for taking the time
just
again.
Just before we jump off, one point is it's like it's one of the things where this is everyone we talk to is like, oh, that's so obvious. Why isn't it just being done by everyone? Or why is it because of the question you answered? It's harder. It's a lot easier to say it than kind of do it and set it up. And so that's the challenge. But I'm excited that we're kind of, I think, leading the forefront of the charge on this and setting things up in a way that can really drive maximal impact and much better resident.
Absolutely. All right, Mike, another one in the books. Thank you so much. Appreciate your insights.
Good one. I love this. Especially love this topic. So nice chatting with you again, Chris. Looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.